This is episode 134 of the Death to Tyrants podcast. Let me tell you about one of my favorite sponsors, and that is Lucky Guy Bakery. Over at luckyguybakery.com, if really delicious, all-natural, handmade brownies sound like something you'd be into, well, this is the place for you. We're coming up on the holiday season, and I know a lot of you guys won't be traveling as much, probably as you did last year. Well, the brownies and treats over at Lucky Guy Bakery are the perfect gift idea. They come in really well-designed, handmade packaging, and each order has a handwritten note, which is a really nice personal touch that they do there at Lucky Guy Bakery. I could obviously go on and on about the flavors and tastes of the brownies. The new peanut butter bonanza bar is the most amazing peanut butter cookie bar that you will ever have. That is my Death to Tyrants guarantee. For those of you wondering if they have, something for your vegan or gluten-free friends, of course they do. Such a cool bakery, handmade items, all natural brownies, no preservatives ever, so many good flavors, such great packaging, such cool gift ideas, and they love this show. Let's give them some business. So go over to luckyguybakery.com and enter promo code DTTP at checkout for 20% off your order. It's an excellent product. They're great people. Their customer service is unparalleled. So go give them some support. Let's get to the show.
The crushing weight of the tyrant's passage had left nothing unmarked.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram wrath. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Death to Tyrants podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. I have been getting a lot of good feedback off the last couple of episodes, so keep it coming. And you can leave ratings and reviews on iTunes. And I would always welcome that, of course, because it helps get my name out there into those algorithms that they use, whatever it is. And as we will discuss today, you might not be surprised if some of the algorithms on certain platforms push content like mine a little off to the side. So I will tell you the backstory on this episode. And you know my guest, it's Dr. Michael Rectenwald. He's been on a couple of times in the past discussing some of his books. Well, I was down in Lake Jackson, Texas, just a few weeks ago, as you might have heard on other episodes, and I saw Michael speak. I got to actually meet him finally in person too, which was cool after having him on a few times on the show. But I saw him speak, and he's dropping bomb after bomb of these knowledge bombs of stuff that I didn't know. And I'm sitting here going, holy shit, man, I've got to get Michael on the show because everyone needs to hear the stuff that he was discussing, the content of this presentation, which of course I will link to in the show notes page for this episode. It's got the video of the presentation and the actual essay of what he spoke on. So, you keep this battle with big tech, or deep tech, as my friend Alana Mercer calls it. It's going to get worse here, and libertarians can be stuck in this awkward spot. Are we trying to say censorship is bad? Obviously we are, but are they private companies, so are they allowed to do it anyway? That's the interesting point. And I think after you hear this discussion with Michael Rectenwald, you'll feel a lot better off saying, no, they are not private companies. They are arms of the CIA, and some people call it the deep state. But I don't want you to even think, if you're sharing this episode with a normie, I don't want them to think I'm some kind of a tinfoil hat type guy. I want you to hear from Dr. Rectenwald himself because he breaks it down quite plainly, and I think you're going to get a lot out of this interview with him. A lot of you know his story. Just in case you don't, I'll go over it quickly. He was a professor at NYU from 2008 to 2019. He was an avowed Marxist, and boom, he had an awakening, which doesn't always happen, especially when you're past a certain age. You kind of go through these transitions in your teens and 20s, and then a lot of people are set. Well, we are very lucky that Dr. Rectenwald had this awakening because he's provided us with some wonderful content. His books are very good. I recommend them. I will link to his page, of course, in the show notes page to this episode. But now, yeah, he's a libertarian. He's no longer a professor, but he's putting out great books, giving great speeches, and we are so lucky to have him here on the show. Dr. Michael Rectenwald, welcome back to the show, sir. How are you?
I'm good, Buck. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Well, I saw your talk down in Lake Jackson where I finally got to meet you in person. And the stuff you talked about, I mean, it dropped a lot of knowledge on me that I have not heard before. And so I know there's a lot of people that don't know a lot of this stuff. And it's a topic that won't go away for sure. I think it's going to get worse over the next 4 years. And this fight against big tech. And I want to get into are they private businesses or not, of course, because I think that's the big key issue here. But before we do that even, what role do you think the big tech companies played in this last election?
I think they served as a filter and a vote suppression mechanism and they're the final arbiters, right, of what reaches people, because most people are getting their news and so forth through social media and of course through Google searches. They become the final arbiter of what passes through. And of course, they stack everything left to the left. And it's all predicated on a leftist agenda. And likewise, they have been squelching anything positive about Trump, for example, and they completely set up a situation in which an election, which I think is a very questionable outcome, becomes acceptable by virtue of the fact that they made it look like it was an inevitability. So I think the role they played was in effect, they effectively rigged the election or helped rig an election by making it a credible result. Then they censored and banned everybody who tried to say anything about it, from the president on down. So they've had an enormous impact.
Do you think that the average, let's say, person on the right, do you think people are figuring this out, or does it still feel like only the weirdos like us that are investigating this stuff can see it?
I think it's pretty evident to most people. There's a huge antipathy out there for social media, particularly Twitter, Facebook, and then for Google. There's a lot of distrust, and it's pretty widespread and prevalent. I think this is almost common knowledge at this point.
You gave some examples of some of the searches that you typed in. They were, humorous, to be honest with you, but it's sad because of the extreme leftward bias. Can you just for my audience, give some examples of some of the stuff you would type in and then what top search results Google would give you?
Yeah, like I typed in the phrase left-wing violence, for example, because I just wanted to see what Google would present. And the first two stories were about white supremacists and far right groups and their violence and their supposed leading the way in terrorism. And then 5 out of those 10 results were about right-wing violence. And then I also searched for, will Democrats steal the 2020 election? And 5 of the 10 results, the first 10 results were about Trump stealing the election. And then I typed in, will Trump steal the election? And all 10, of course, were about Trump stealing the election, the prospect of it. So it just shows you that. And I ran these searches elsewhere, too. I used DuckDuckGo and ran the same searches, and they did not stack this way. But Google has almost a 90% share. And so that's going to tilt a lot of people's views, or at least steer them towards what they're trying to steer them towards, and disappear everything they don't want you to see.
I want to talk about a term that you borrowed from the famous, or infamous maybe, postmodernist Michael Foucault, and that is governmentalities. What do you mean when you use that term?
Yeah, well, Foucault meant sort of the way the government is transmitted to the populace that is governed, and how it is adopted, how government imperatives are adopted by the governed, just how they end up governing themselves vis-a-vis government dictates. And but I thought it should be broadened to include industries that are working as governmental apparatuses, state apparatuses. And that is to say that state functions are transferred to private enterprises, so-called. And then these private enterprises end up doing the work of the state. And you can see that in many ways. I could go into some examples. But for example, if you go on an airplane, the flight attendants have state power. And I've actually watched a video in which a flight attendant was speaking before the flight, saying that she would have you arrested if you didn't wear a mask, and she would also have you picked up at the end of the flight, and you would never be able to fly on an airplane for the rest of your life on any airline.
Wow.
So if that isn't a state function, I don't know what is. That's the kind of thing that I'm getting at with the idea of governmentality. And that is, I'm trying to understand just what is the state, because while libertarians talk about the state a lot, it's often left kind of nebulous just what it is and how far it extends.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been trying to, get a way to handle the notion that the state doesn't just in fact function out of the government as such, that governmental functions are transferred to various agencies and industries and corporations and so forth, and they end up having the power of the state and enacting it. So that's one example, and there are many others.
Yeah, a lot of friends in the liberty world, it's big in this world that we warn of socialism and governmental takeover of private industry and the means of production. But what you're talking about, it seems more realistic and dangerous at this moment. It's like, James Burnham warned in his writings of the managerial revolution. And it's this weird mix of corporate power and state power kind of intermingled. And
yes,
it seems almost to be done in the shadows rather than just straight up in your face like historical socialism was. Does that seem like the bigger threat right now in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. What I call is the governmentalization of private industry. And that seems to me to be the bigger threat. Even the left decries this notion of, the left decries this notion when state functions are taken over by private industry. They call this neoliberalism.
Mm-hmm.
To my way of thinking, that is not scary at all. In fact, I wish the state would dissolve into privatization entirely. What scares me and bothers me is the governmentalization of the private industry, not the privatization of governmental functions. But in a sense, they end up being the same thing, because you have although the difference is, in the one case, under what the left decries, the government is shrinking as state functions are taken over. Here, the government expands. The state expands by virtue of deputizing, if you will,
mm-hmm.
these private enterprises.
Well, I guess let's get to the meat of this topic, really what I think is key. Because another thing we hear in the liberty world, obviously we're always quick to jump to the defense of private businesses when they make decisions that some see as controversial, baking cakes for certain groups or not baking cakes for others and that. And of course, we always say, well, they're a private company.
Right.
That's their decision. And we've heard that many times, even from libertarians, about Google and Facebook. And one of the things I find humorous, now we also hear it a lot from the left, only regarding Google, Facebook, and Twitter. They'd never care about private ownership in any other facet in life.
Right.
But I digress a little bit. So are Google and Facebook private companies?
I think it's very much a dubious claim to say that they're strictly private enterprises. First of all, as I pointed out in that talk, their startup money, how they got off the ground came right through the intelligence agencies and some military contracts, of course.
Yes.
Especially in the case of Google. So some would say, well, that's a genetic fallacy. So just because they started as with government grants, that doesn't mean, or government investment, I should say, that doesn't mean that they're state apparatuses. I mean, if that were the case, anybody that took a student loan would be a state apparatus. Well, there's more to it than that, because their very identity has been shaped by the IC, or intelligence community constituency. And they still function as state apparatuses by virtue of the fact that they provide backdoor access to these intelligence agencies. They allow data to be turned over without a question to the state upon demand. The NSA is basically living inside of Facebook, Google, and Twitter. So, I mean, these are like shells in which the state sort of burrows, waiting, and then seizing. So they're not strictly private enterprises. No, they're functioning as governmentalities. They're functioning as state apparatuses doing the work of the state and harboring the state within their very software.
There's going to be a lot of names there in this discussion that people are not going to be familiar with, so I want to get into some of them. Let's cover Facebook's startup funding. Within the talk, you named 3, I guess we'll quote unquote businesses or entities that helped get Facebook started. Can you talk about those 3?
Yeah, that was Planeteer, Excel Partners, and Greylock Partners. All of these organizations were funded by In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel was created in 1999 by CIA. It was their private sector venture capital investment firm to fund promising startups that might create technologies of use for these intelligence agencies. So what it is, it looks like that Facebook got funded by private investors, but these private investors were stood up by In-Q-Tel, which was stood up by the CIA. So that's where their money first came from. And there's been some conjecture by some whistleblowers that worked in IC that suggest that Facebook was not created as a platform for social expression and exchange primarily, but as a data mining source. And that that's its primary function, and that the sort of ruse that's been established has been to make it look like it's just fun and games and sharing kitty pictures on Facebook and whatever. But there's some conjecture that suggests that in fact that was the primary function in the first place, as that to be a source of data mining for the intelligence community. So that's Facebook's funding. That's its original startup capital.
And then, so Google, I believe you said, was directly funded from In-Q-Tel, whereas Facebook had kind of these offshoot companies that were funded by In-Q-Tel funding it.
Right.
So Google was directly from In-Q-Tel?
Yes. So In-Q-Tel invested directly in Google. It was not apparent until In-Q-Tel sold their stock in 2005 in Google. So that shows you they had, I think it was $2.2 million worth of stock. I mean, that doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but when you're starting something up, and that's where your funding's coming from, that's going to condition your loyalties and and so forth.
Yeah, it almost seems like it would shape your whole thought process on your company when these guys are giving you the money, these kind of shadowy figures of the CIA.
Yeah, and a lot of their technology was made with the CIA interest at heart. Their whole search engine was developed under IC military specs. So they were trying to please the intelligence community from the outset to provide functions that they were looking for data mining, for gathering and sorting information in a way that would be unprecedented for the CIA or the NSA to have this kind of data, effectively volunteered and available to them on an unprecedented scale thanks to the internet. So, the internet itself was born through DARPA.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, some of these major players on the internet that are also connected to military intelligence. So it's a very curious thing.
Hey guys, let's take a minute to talk about one of our sponsors, and that is Lorezatti Coffee. I love these guys, not just because they were our very first sponsor, but because, like I've said many times, their coffee is so damn good. If you guys like coffee that tastes the way coffee is actually supposed to taste, with natural flavors that come from the region and the roast of the beans, rather than from artificial flavorings like some other brands use, well, then you'll love Lorezatti Coffee. If you're a real coffee drinker like myself, you don't want these weird flavors in your coffee like key lime pie or blueberry muffin. You want strong, traditional flavors that actually come from the beans themselves, and that's exactly what you get with Lorezatti Coffee. You can get Lorenzatti's signature Venetian blend. This stuff comes right from Italy, okay? You can do whole beans, medium fine grind, which that one's actually perfect to use in the French press like I prefer. It comes in these really cool, beautifully designed, resealable tins that ship to you, hermetically sealed, and keep the coffee very, very fresh. Guys, I cannot speak highly enough of Lorenzatti. They're lovers of liberty. They love this show. They support this show. So why not support them by getting yourself some damn good coffee? So go to lorenzatti.coffee. That is LORENZOTTI.coffee. Guess what? We got a promo code, and that, as you know, is DTTP for Death to Tyrants Podcast. You'll get 10% off your order at checkout. Again, that's lorenzatti.coffee. Enter code DTTP at checkout. Let's get back to the show. Sometimes I would hear people like Tucker Carlson refer to Google and these guys as monopolies, and it would bug me only because before I heard this talk from you, it's very hard to have a monopoly without regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And usually monopolies happen with the government's assistance.
Right.
And so I hear this talk from you and I think, well, maybe it does make sense that they are quasi-monopolistic because they do have government help by its very nature.
Yeah, they do have government. They have government help. They had government assistance, and they had, listen, and at Stanford, and Silicon Valley, the IC community was out there the whole time. They were helping Google develop itself. But furthermore, they have gotten, in the case of social media, exemptions from the state.
Yes.
that are not given to other publishers. For example, the 230 Communications Decency Act clause, which grants them immunity from legal suits. Because they're not supposed to be publishers, they're supposed to be just information purveyors or places or platforms. It really was an unprecedented thing. Platforms where expression could be made that they couldn't possibly edit. But as we know, they are editing it. So they are acting as publishers, but getting an exemption from liability that publishers would all stand to be open to or be vulnerable to. So they have that also going for them.
The Section 230 thing that you just mentioned, that seems to be the route some Republicans in Congress are taking as to help solve this issue. Would that fix some of it if they removed Section 230 protections?
It could help because there could be then a class action suit of some sort that could be undertaken that would bring them down a big notch. Now, some libertarians would say, well, that's just the state interfering again. But if the state's going to dissolve itself in some ways, it's going to almost have to come from the state doing it to itself.
Yes.
So this case is one of those. I think it's a case where the state intervened, gave them an exemption that should have never been granted, and now it needs to undo what it did. So that would, I think, be a positive step. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would definitely help because there could be, I can't even foresee what kind of class action suit it would be and on what grounds, but I could see it happening for sure.
Talk about keyhole. You mentioned that in your discussion as well, and that was another one of these phrases or companies I was not familiar with.
Keyhole was a company that was developing satellite and GPS to map the entire globe. basically the name is keyhole because they're suggesting they could look into the keyhole and see right into any place, you know. So they developed from that. Google purchased Keyhole. Then from that, they developed Google Earth, and Google Earth is a planetary mapping system that includes every domicile, every building, everything on the face of the earth has been cataloged and completely surveilled. Now, they have blacked out some places, for example. Sensitive state locations are blacked out by Google Earth so that people don't know where they are. So that tells you, again, they're doing state functions. Google Earth is this is the Google God complex, really. Google wants to know everything. And then it also wants to be the arbiter of morality as well. So this is a very curious situation where you have a kind of, they want an omniscience, you know, everything that can be known, they want to know it. And then they also want to be the arbiter of what's right and wrong. So they have their own commandments as well.
Is it just a cultural issue within Silicon Valley that the bias always pushes left? Or do you think that could be directed from CIA, from within Google, or maybe a combination of both?
Well, so I've been working on this problem for some time, trying to understand why Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. are leftists, you know, and leftist authoritarians, which of course all leftists are authoritarians. So to me, it came down to the fact that they have an interest in what we'll call, for lack of a better term, the deep state, or the permanent bureaucracy of the state and its growth. And of course, that accords very well with leftist politics, which is statist at base, right?
Yep.
Everything about leftism, now not all statism isn't leftism necessarily, but all leftism is statism.
Yes.
So that's, I think, is the final connection between them. It isn't just that people at Google were indoctrinated into leftist ideology, although they were. Google wouldn't have to hire those people if they didn't want them. So I think it accords very well with this notion that the left wants to grow the state to an inordinate degree endlessly. And it just so happens that leftism really aligns itself with deep state interest, if you will.
Yes. Because
it looks for the growth of the state and all, total control by the state. And here you have these enterprises that actually gain by virtue of extending state reach.
Yep.
So that's, I think, the way I've tried to explain it.
Yeah, it's like they found very willing partnership amongst each other. Go figure, the left and the state. I also want to talk about the Atlantic Council, because you brought that up, and it's one that I hear often. That's initially what I would always hear, is that there's connections with these companies to the Atlantic Council. What is the Atlantic Council, and what is their relationship with Google or Facebook?
Well, the Atlantic Council, like the Highlands Forum, is a IC military think tank. It's kind of like the World Economic Foundation in the military and intelligence sector. And this is where people meet. And, this is where these high-level meetings take place between military intelligence and business community business leaders. And so this is where these exchanges happen, So the Atlantic Group is a high-level influence lobby, you might say, but a lobby with an inside track, basically. They're a place for these people to commingle and share their ideas and basically set agendas, really what it comes down to.
Another troubling connection that we keep hearing and seeing more evidence of is the tech giants and their connection with China. Can you talk about that as well? Yeah,
I mean, it just so happens that their ideologies match up pretty well. China is their whole social media apparatuses are functionary state apparatuses that work to surveil and control information. And they are also reaching out into Western U.S., particularly technologies, including Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And they have a lot of influence in the United States companies, or whatever they are. I wouldn't even call them United States companies. These corporations, they have done all kinds of things that they pull a lot of strings. For example, with Twitter and Facebook, they've got kind of like a carte blanche card to run around and create bots and fake Twitter and fake Facebook accounts, and to then propagate Chinese CCP propaganda. You have Twitter employees, for example, actually training Chinese officials, teaching them pro bono how to amplify their pro-China messaging, just for example. You had YouTube deleting all comments critical of the Communist Party due to error for a long time until it got pointed out and became too blatant. You have Twitter, for example, in 2019, on the date of June 4th, commemorating the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, purging tens of thousands of accounts that were critical of the Chinese government, just days ahead of that anniversary. So they're not only helping to censor, they're helping to amplify the CCP's messaging. It's just, it's not surprising to me because, like I said, I think they share they're kins. They are ideological, political twins. They're not at all at odds with each other whatsoever. They have the same sort of leftist authoritarian outlook.
Your past and your story should be familiar to most of my listeners. You've been on a few times on the show. Do you still have contact with, or let's see, are you even friends with some of your old Marxist comrades, so to speak?
Very few. The only ones that did not totally disavow me were ones that liked me I actually knew pretty personally, and they weren't horrified by me. They weren't they didn't delete me, they didn't cancel me, but there's very few left, and that was a few rather open-minded ones. I mean, relatively speaking.
Do you know their thoughts on this type of deep tech censorship in this movement?
No, I haven't seen them complain about it at all.
Yeah.
I don't see them saying anything about it whatsoever. Because don't forget, that it's the opposition to these people that's being deleted, canceled, demoted, blacklisted, et cetera, et cetera. So they more or less rejoice at it, I call this, the people that study this inside the academy, I call them digitalistas, because they're doing, all they see on the internet is capitalism, and it's, exploiting people, but they don't see the authoritarian leftism right in their face.
Yeah,
because they're authoritarian leftists as well.
For my listeners sitting here, hearing some of this for the first time and thinking, well, what do we do? I mean, this seems almost overwhelming. What do we do? We mentioned Section 230. There is a fight to get that removed. What are some of the other options that you see? Encouraging
people with serious money to all create alternative platforms. Of course, competition is always the answer. Also not only, and to make sure they don't become silos. Well, what we don't want to do is silo ourselves into a space that nobody else is listening to. Because that is sort of like what they would prefer is, in effect, putting us in a box where it's an echo chamber and nobody from outside ever sees or hears another thing from us.
Yeah. I got to ask you this, because you did come from the deep Marxist left. Mm-hmm. What redeeming qualities do you think the far left, do they have any? Because to some of us, it seems like that's a totalitarian, supremacist movement that basically wants us all dead, for lack of a better term. Are there redeeming qualities, or do you think that it is a movement that would just assume us be all gone?
Well, I used to notice when I was a leftist and a Marxist that some of my so-called friends would every once in a while joke about how they would put a bullet in the back of this one's head and that one's head and this one's head, and they were all down with that. And I was I thought maybe they're just kidding, but I don't think they're kidding at all. I think they absolutely would if they had the power. And so, on whole, they're absolutely untrustworthy. Mm-hmm. There are people that are in it, sort of like I was, just idealists that are mistaken. They just don't know what it obviously and always will lead to. And so they have kind of a naive perspective about sort of human nature and this notion that, basically we're just aspiring to this collective where we own everything and there's no more rulers and there's no dictatorship of any sort. This is why, that would dissolve into the state and the state would be coterminous with the people and therefore there would be no state. That was the view I had. But these are very few and far between. Most of them are just little Stalin running on, Billy.
And in the liberty world here, we often discuss the non-aggression principle. And is there an inherent weakness in that if our enemies don't want to abide by it?
This is kind of like what is similarly called the liberal paradox. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean liberal in the contemporary sense. This classical liberal paradox, really, is that by virtue of allowing speech and by virtue of being libertarian with reference to expression and self-determination, it necessarily leaves open the possibility of totalitarians running around and vying for free speech, which we should accord them, but whose ends are to totally destroy us. Mm-hmm. So this paradox has been worked on by several people, Karl Popper and others. It was taken to an extreme by the left. They effectively said, we can't allow any speech that we would disapprove of because it's regressive and it would be anti-liberatory. This is Herbert Marcuse in his Repressive Tolerance, for example. It is a paradox, and that's why I think there also has to be a self-defense clause in effect. Mm-hmm. And that has to be, even though we're all very staunch individualists, I am anyway, I'm not sure I should say that, I guess. I'm a staunch individualist, and I don't like collectivism, even activism I don't like. It disgusts me. I just hate groupism entirely. However, there should be a self-defense clause appended to that, which says there has to be defense against totalitarians and their ambitions to take over and to silence us and to squelch us and effectively even to kill us. Mm-hmm. Of course, there is you do have the right of self-defense when your property. I think you should unilaterally have the right of self-defense of yourself and your property, because your property is an extension of yourself, in my opinion, and that should be defended like your life because you actually put much of your life into getting it. So this is my claim against these people. It's only property. Mm-hmm. It's easy for you to say you didn't make it,
right. Right.
And you didn't pour hours of sweat and hard work and worry and whatever it takes to gain wealth into it. So it's easy for you to just erase it like that. But it's not the same for people that are invested in that. So I think that the non-aggression principle may be have appended to it a sort of a group, a cooperative statement about defense of property and rights.
I want to tell you guys about a great sponsor of the Death to Tyrants podcast, and that is our friends over at Zippix Toothpicks. These are flavored toothpicks. They've got several great flavors. Check these out: cinnamon, clove, mocha, and whiskey even. But not only that, each toothpick actually contains nicotine, and I use these toothpicks all of the time. Not only are they a great alternative to that nasty habit you may be trying to stop, and that includes vaping, come on now, but they taste great. They are way more socially acceptable. They are cheaper than any alternative. Hell, I don't even dip or smoke or anything like that, and I still love these Zippix toothpicks. Out of all the alternatives on the market, these are the most cost-effective, and better yet, they are a sponsor of this show. When a small business is out there helping to support one of your favorite Liberty podcasts like this one, let's thank them by returning the support. Since you are a loyal listener to the Death to Tyrants podcast, you will get 10% off of your order by entering promo code DTTP at checkout when you order over at zippixtoothpicks.com. Once again, go to zippixtoothpicks.com. That's ZIPPIX toothpicks.com and type in promo code DTTP for Death to Tyrants podcast at checkout, and you will get 10% off of your order, and you will be supporting Zippix and Death to Tyrants at the same time. So go do it. Let's get back to the show. I go back and forth in my mind. It's almost like a black pill versus white pill. If Joe Biden does indeed become president, which seems fairly likely at this point, although at this point it's 2020, so I'm not discounting anything. I go back, of all people, these tech companies, I mean, that is the perfect mix of government power and tech power is what a Biden administration represents to me. So I start thinking, geez, this is going to be worse than ever. But then I think maybe Trump red-pilled enough people to see what's really going on. And maybe he unmasked enough of these terrible forces that a lot of Americans are going to see what's going on and fight against this. Do you think it's going to get worse under Biden, or is that optimism justified that I have?
Well, I think that Trump served as a clarifying element. And that has, as you said, red pill people, it's helped to clarify what we're dealing with. And for that matter, that may have been the work, that work may have been done, as you're suggesting, so that when the Biden administration, if and when they roll out all of their plans, which are, to me, going to be, on the one hand, what they're going to do is proffer sort of like a debt relief and UBI type programs in exchange for liberty, in effect. Mm-hmm. But I think that the constituent that has seen these apparatuses and this agenda for what it is have been, they've had clarification thanks to Trump's interjection into the political sphere. So I think that it will probably consolidate opposition to this. That's what I think. I don't think it's going to be a rollover deal where they can just roll over us.
Right.
And everybody will just lay down. I don't think so.
Yeah, it does seem that the Trump moment definitely threw a kink in their plans. And I think without that, to think that Hillary would have been president for the last 4 years and then roll into a Biden administration would certainly be darker days. Yeah,
that's for sure. I mean, I'm not a Trump fanatic, but I do see him for representing what he has represented. And that has been, like I said, a clarification. I know a Marxist, in fact, that says he's actually a pro-Trumper. Mm-hmm. And he calls it the Trump readjustment or something like that. And that is to say it throws into relief the political elite and their allegiances and their connections and their whole campaign. And now we see that for what it is, the political establishment, which is aligned with the deep state, also with the neocons, also with, ironically, Black Lives Matter and Antifa.
Yes.
This is what the left is today. I would have been, see, if I hadn't left the left when I did, I would have left it anyway, because it's just unbelievable what counts as leftism here.
Yes.
They're lined behind tech oligarchs, the deep state, the neocon establishment, the political elite. I mean, it's just unbelievable. That's the confabulation that makes up this whole contingent now of the resistance, as it were,
Yes.
as it had been.
Yeah.
So,
Who would have thought the hippies of the 60s, if you would have said, let's jump into a time machine and look at 2020, and the left now is in bed with the CIA, the neocon warmongers, the giant corporations, and they represent a quote-unquote resistance movement. Incredible.
It's hilarious. I mean, it would be hilarious if it weren't so deleterious. I mean, it's just unbelievable, right? So, yeah, the left, they're defending the CIA now.
Yes. Incredible.
So, unbelievable.
I'd be remiss in not asking you about your new book. One of the things I've noticed about you, it seems like it's easy for you to crank out great works of art in these books that you keep publishing and putting out quickly. I think I've had you on for at least 2 of them. Talk about this new book. I picked it up in Lake Jackson, and I want my audience to understand what it is.
Yeah, my new book is a novel. So the last 3 books were all nonfiction: Springtime for Snowflakes, Google Archipelago, and Beyond Woke. And this time I decided to make it fiction. I wrote a novel called Thought Criminal, and it's a dystopian, futuristic sci-fi adventure movie. Not movie. That's wishful thinking. Book at this state, and it's set in this dystopian techno future in which there's an entity called Collective Mind, which is sort of the super cloud computing development that was created when the various individual privately owned clouds collected into a singular cloud and became the main architecture for social and total political control. And they aim at connecting your neocortex to the inputs from Collective Mind vis-a-vis neurobots, but they're really calling it a virus, incidentally. So they release this virus intentionally, but they tell everybody that they're trying to keep them from getting the virus, and therefore they need to be treated, but the treatment is actually the virus itself. And the vaccine actually helps propagate the virus. So I wrote this because I didn't want to be writing about COVID in the era of COVID and all of the, you can't accuse me of being a conspiracy theorist. I'm just trying to lay out a way of looking at things that make us see the world differently and to see what these features would look like in a future setting. And you would look at them and say, oh, wow, look at how horrible this is, and then reflect back on what we're dealing with rather than going into the specifics of what we're dealing with, where you get debate and you get called a conspiracy theorist and all this nonsense. So I set it in a future. This is a future in which the state is singular and global. It's called the Federation of Pandemos. Pandemos, of course, sounds like pandemic, but it really also means, it primarily means actually a pan-global democratic state. Of course, we know when people use terms like a democratic state or democratic republic, and it's North Korea, that these words are, absurd. But yeah, that's what it's called, the Federation of Pandemos. And there's a hero there who's a neuro AI professor who defects and is called, basically dubbed a thought deviationist, and he goes on the run, and it goes from there.
Very cool. It almost sounds a little eerily nonfiction, but at this, I'm glad it's fiction so far. Also, you did some work on Liberty Classroom. Is that correct?
Yes, I have a course up there on Liberty Classroom. It's called Critical Theory, Cultural Studies, and Postmodern Theory, where I do a deep dive into those fields and to see what these thinkers really said. And then I critically analyze them in terms of what they mean for civil liberty. Excellent.
Go ahead and plug away anything you'd like, really. Talk about your website, and you mentioned your other books as well.
Yeah, I mean, my website, michaelrectenwald.com, where you can get connected to my books. I'm selling my books online directly. If you want a signed copy, you'll go to Apogee Bookstore on my website, Apogee, APOGEE Bookstore. It's a link on the website, michaelrectenwald.com, and I'll send you a signed and inscribed copy. Otherwise, Amazon, unfortunately, they keep the best ranking system, so I encourage people to go there if they want to buy it elsewhere. And that's basically everything is up on my website. I keep all my essays. The Google election, which we spoke about at length here today, is up there, plus the talk, the video of the talk, which I'm not happy with when we talk. But I never like my performances. I'm never satisfied, but it's there.
Well, it spurred me to get you on for this. I love the talk. It was, you dropped, and I hope we did today too, you dropped a lot of knowledge that I know. I keep hearing this debate out there, and I think after I heard you, they all need to hear Michael Rectenwald give them this information because it's key in this argument.
Yeah, I think so. I've been just trying to grapple with this idea of what is the state and how do these operatives work and what is their relationship to it, and that's where I've gotten so far. So yeah, and Google Archipelago goes into this as well. Yeah.
Yes, well, thank you for joining me once again on the show, Michael, and I will link to your website, of course, in the show notes page for this episode. Thank you, sir.
No, thanks for having me, Buck.
Yes, I hope you guys enjoyed that discussion with Dr. Michael Rectenwald. He's always fun to chat with. What a cool guy. And let's see, I will link to his stuff in the show notes page, of course. You heard him there. It's michaelrectenwald.com. And as for this show, you should already know it's death-to-tyrants-podcast.com. And like I mentioned earlier, leave a rating or a review on the iTunes section. You guys have been doing that. There's some nice things y'all have written, so I thank you for that. Share this on Twitter, share it on Facebook, whatever you want, because this is actually, this is a lot of important content that so many people, even in our little world, don't know. So we owe it to everyone, really. And I thank Dr. Rectenwald for doing this research because this is big. And until next week, I will see you guys later.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Death to Tyrants podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.